Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are going to be getting into another mock draft. We're going to format this one a little bit differently. We're going to be reviewing two different strategies. So we have Matt built out a team that's a little bit more risky, a little bit maybe higher upside, and then built out a team for me that's a little bit higher floor that is a little safer, but maybe doesn't have quite so much boom potential. So I'm looking forward to getting into this. Again, if you're here with us, hit that subscribe button. It helps us out a lot. So we're going to start with Matt's team at the 103. And as you can see, just running through his players, he's got Saquon, Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, Drake Maye, Mike Evans, George Kittle, Cooper Kupp, Caleb Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Amari Cooper, Michael Penix Jr., Adam Thielen, and Jordan Mason. I like this team a lot, but I'll let you go through it first.
You start off the top with Saquon, right? I wouldn't necessarily call that a risky pick. I think it's just more so we don't really see running backs finish as the RB1 in fantasy in back-to-back years. With CMC, we've talked about this before, where he is either league winner or bust. So I think we're going to see a pretty decent discount on him this year in Superflex, just because obviously QBs get pushed up, but people that took him number one last year are definitely feeling burned from that. And the other co-captain of the number one pick in a lot of leagues last year, Tyreek Hill, he's going to get pushed down quite a bit. Obviously, this is assuming that he stays with Miami. There's no guarantee there. We know he said I'm out at the end of the year, but that could have just been a little bit of emotion playing into that. But with Hill, he's getting older. This offense was obviously shifting quite a bit more to Devon Achane, Jonnu Smith. So we'll see. But if he gets back to full strength, he's got top two upside, I think even still. With Drake Maye, I love Drake Maye, man. And I think with him, I expect him to take a big step forward this year. We expect him to get a number one receiving weapon as well as offensive line help. So as much as I think that this is a fairly safe pick, it's still a second-year quarterback in the fourth round. So should he regress, which obviously can happen, we saw it with CJ Stroud this last year, and being super flex, you got to make sure you hit with that top quarterback. With Mike Evans, I'll never be the person to say fade Mike Evans because of age. We just have to acknowledge Father Time exists in this risky build, and at some point, he's got to slow down, right? I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but same with George Kittle. Again, sticking with the theme of high upside, aging guys, all of these guys, Kittle specifically, he finished as the tight end ones in points per game this year.
He hasn't finished less than fifth in the last 4 years. Yeah. So, there's a level of safety with Kittle that I think we undervalued going into last year. And so, I think he's going to get pushed up a little bit this year. We don't know what the wide receiver position is going to look like for San Francisco to start the year, specifically with Ayuk having torn his ACL. So I don't think he's going to necessarily be ready, and Kittle could get off to a hot start for sure.
Yeah, with Kittle, it's more of, we know he's a candidate to miss time any given year, which anyone is, but Kittle definitely has a longer track record. And with Cooper Kupp, I know we talked about him in the last episode. I don't really know what to do with him. There's a chance that we see week one, he comes out and gets targets in the teens, or even, remember last year, he was 21 targets week one or something absurd. There's also a chance that he completely falls off a cliff. At the end of the year, he was not doing super hot, and in the playoffs, he was really not that involved whatsoever. And then Caleb, again, is about as boom bust as it gets going into the new year. He's got a new coach. Would expect, hopefully reinforcements on the offensive line, because he was just getting eaten alive out there. But I think at this price, it's definitely worth taking a shot. And then with Jeudy and Cooper, I don't know, they're so talented. But we saw Jeudy was really only relevant with Jameis Winston, and Amari Cooper completely disappeared with Josh Allen. That was a little bit of a surprise. I don't really have an explanation for that, but we'll see. I know he's still under contract for quite some time, so I think maybe a full offseason with Josh Allen. We would expect that to improve, but we didn't really see it improve much at all. And then, again, going back to the well with quarterback, Michael Penix, he only played a couple games at the end of the year. Anything can happen. While I like Penix and while I think he's going to be solid for this offense, like we just don't know. And then with Thielen, it's like he's really old, but we saw again him just turn it on at the end of the season. Week 17, he went off. So who knows with him? He's kind of just, again, if you can catch a streak where he gets hot, he can be really valuable. And then at the end, Jordan Mason just adding, obviously, the handcuff to CMC. But the way that this is built out, a robust running back, and you're planning on starting those two guys any given week. So I was attacking wide receiver, obviously through the middle rounds with guys that I think can be as high upside as possible given their ADP. So I like this build. I just, again, it would petrify me, and it's one where the wheels could fall off pretty quickly.
Yeah, a couple things I noticed on this team. Michael Penix, I think through the offseason is going to get pushed up.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be bordering on a top 20 quarterback pick, if not higher than that. I mean, he showed pretty good rapport with Drake in week 18, and that's something that
Drake London
fantasy owners just aren't going to have been paying much attention to necessarily. So when they go back and they look at his numbers, Drake London with Penix, I think there's going to be a good correlation there, and then he's going to start to get pushed up boards. He's probably going to get rave reviews. There's going to be some highlights that get shown because he played pretty well at the end of the year. So
yeah,
Penix I definitely like a lot better than some of the guys that went before him, I guess here. But the other thing I noticed too, and something that if I'm going to go running back at the top, there's no way I'm just not going to pick another one. I understand you get behind the ball a little bit at wide receiver, but wide receiver is the position that you're going to be weaker at, especially the third spot. And so if I go running back, I'm also looking to fill my flex spot with a running back, and I probably want to get a fourth before I start getting into handcuff range. So I don't know. I feel like this team is super risky because if McCaffrey gets hurt, this team is not going to be good. And that to me is just really a tough pill to swallow because, running back, I think running back depth is really, really important. Like instead of Evans, you could have had Breece Hall. Instead of Jerry Jeudy, you could have had, well, I guess all these guys are kind of bad, but instead of Kupp, maybe you take one of the guys in this area, James Conner, Brian Robinson, something like that. Just to lock in the position, you still get Tyreek Hill, you still get Evans, and then, you work off of Cooper, Thielen, that type of range for your third wide receiver. That's how I would build out if you're going to go running back. Obviously, ton of upside here because McCaffrey, way later than he got picked last year. Tyreek Hill, way later than he got picked last year. Evans, even later than he got picked last year. Cooper Kupp, later than he got picked last year. So if those guys stay healthy and hit, even despite their age, this team has a ton of upside. Last thing I'll say about this team too, Jordan Mason, right? Obviously we're playing it as though he's the handcuff. He's a free agent, so he's not going to be back in San Francisco most likely. He's probably going to test the market, try and get into an offense that needs a running back, right? So maybe he goes post-draft somewhere else. If there isn't that opportunity, maybe he comes back to San Francisco. But his situation is kind of up in the air. But whoever the handcuff from McCaffrey is going to be, that's kind of the point. To make sure. Yeah, exactly. That's the point. So anybody that's watching saying Mason's a free agent, it's like no. Well, the point of the pick is to highlight that. If you pick McCaffrey, you need his handcuff, and you might even need to pick him rounds before this. Going over to my team here, so. This is a little bit more of the floor team, a little bit more safety. Not to say it doesn't have upside, but the first two picks, I personally love the first two picks. If I had the 9th pick and I got those two players, I would be over the moon with that start. So Joe Burrow and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I picked Amon-Ra St. Brown in our league 5th overall, and I don't have a big regret about that. So being able to get him at 12, I think is a huge value and something that I'm going to be rooting to get a late pick if he's going to be able to fall to the end of the first round, beginning of the second round area. Coming back around, again, you got Derrick Henry. I feel like we know exactly what he is. People are a little concerned with his age and the offense, and that didn't matter. He was just really good. So if he's going to continue to be a third round pick here, I'm going to just continue to pick him. I think that's an excellent spot to be able to take your first running back as well. And you kind of see through the first 4 picks because I get McBride in round 4. This build is something that I personally like to do if it falls that way, right? I don't want to force it, and I don't necessarily want to force any draft strategy. But if you can get your top quarterback, your top receiver, your top running back, and your top tight end in your first 4 picks, I really, really, really like that build because it just opens up the draft to you in ways that if you go like receiver, 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 or you go running back, receiver, running back, right? That then you get kind of closed off in a position early in the draft. And if you don't do that, if you pick one of each and it works out for you to take one of each, then the rest of the draft, you get to just continue to play the board, continue to play the value, continue to play your favorite players that come available. So you see that a little bit here. T. Higgins, he was actually averaged the second most points behind Jamar Chase this past year. He obviously struggled with injuries, but it was a pretty impressive performance from him overall. Definitely when he was healthy, ranked as a top 10 wide receiver very routinely. So I like the pick there at the end of the 5th round, despite the injury risk. Tua, I know you hate Tua, but I personally really like Tua. When he's out there and rolling, Tua is one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy. So, he always kind of runs off a streak like that where he'll be averaging, he'll have like a 6-7 game streak where he's averaging in the top 5 quarterbacks. And then the rest of it is just like he's out with injury or the wheels completely fall off and he's averaging 10 points a game. He's
so
kind of hard to judge, but it's so frustrating because you see he can be good. He just he hasn't done it for 17 games yet. So, maybe this is the year, but I don't necessarily think so. I think you just ride the hot hand and you enjoy that you can get somebody that produces as a top 5 player for a certain stretch of the year in the 6th round. You just don't really get that very often. So that's why I always like drafting Tua. I'll figure out the other quarterback if I have to, if he's not playing well. Going down in the 7th round, there's nobody safer than Jakobi Meyers. He just is what he is, in my opinion, right? I mean, he missed multiple games. Still had 130 targets, finished as wide receiver 19. He's been a top 30 wide receiver 4 straight years, despite it not feeling like that at all. And the last 2 years, he was top 25. Obviously, earlier in the career, not quite as good when he was just starting out with New England. But I really like Jakobi Meyers. He has an awesome floor. Whoever the quarterback is going to be is going to lean on him. And they could add a wide receiver, but that almost helps him even more, I think. David Montgomery. I mean, we know exactly what he is. Touchdown scorer, always on the field for the first drive. If Detroit gets in close on the opening drive, he's going to score right away at the first drive. It's so nice to have that where it's just like, oh, I don't need to look at David Montgomery's box score the rest of the day.
Yeah. It's 10:09 in the morning and he's already in the end zone.
Yeah, and it's just so great. You just get to kick your feet up. And you're like, all right, now I need to worry about somebody else, hopefully getting into the end zone. And then, it's great when you get a notification at 11:02 that, David Montgomery scored a 12-yard touchdown. It's like, oh, nice. This is going to be a great day for me. So he obviously has a little bit of bottom out potential with Gibbs there, right? If the early game script doesn't go well for him or he doesn't score, Gibbs is kind of the ringer, finisher, or whatever you want to say. He gets the second drive. So, I do think that there's a little bit of a cap on Montgomery, but I personally love having him. He's a set it and forget it starter. Rome Odunze, I think this is a little bit interesting one because we're in the 9th round, and that's not necessarily the biggest floor pick, but we know what the talent is. He was the 9th overall pick last year. I don't expect Keenan Allen to come back, and they got Ben Johnson.
Yeah.
I feel like that is just setting him up for a monster breakout in year 2. Maybe in the way that we saw JSN break out, right? Like, he's probably not going to get that many targets. He's not really a super crafty short area target, but I do think that we can expect a breakout from him because he was probably the rookie receiver that maybe not disappointed the most because we knew he was going to be buried on the depth chart, but he was the one that produced the least. And so I think that's going to swing in a big way in year 2. J.K. Dobbins, maybe that's just we can plug that in as Chargers running back because I don't expect him to be the starter. I expect the Chargers to address the position in the draft. But again, he was really good. And at this point, he might have to deal with injuries like he does every single year. But when he's out on the field, you have a player that you can definitely play. So he's explosive. He scores touchdowns. He catches passes. So in terms of a floor play from week to week, I do like Dobbins quite a bit. Geno Smith, he's the ultimate floor play because he'll get ranked outside the top 20 and always finish in the top 15. I shouldn't say it like that, but he has the potential to finish in the top 15. He's the last 3 years as the starter for Seattle, he's finished 5, 19, and 13. So not always in the top 15, but I think there's going to be year-over-year consistency with the offense, and he's going to continue to be that hover around quarterback 15. And then Pittman and Dobbs, these two guys have the potential to be the number one receivers on their offense. So they have a decent floor, despite the fact that both of the passing games are very crowded and they're not necessarily going to be the top target any given week. So they're tough to predict, but they could be guys that you feel pretty good about just plugging in during bye weeks. If you have a lot of injuries, maybe you go to these guys as your starters while you figure it out, or while your team gets healthy. So I do like in the later rounds, right, that these guys do have a decent floor. And that's kind of why we did this build, right, to highlight those type of players, because I don't necessarily think this is what you want to do with your later round picks. You probably want to take some bigger swings, at least at some of the positions. That's why I like the Odunze pick. But later in the draft, right, like Adam Thielen, I feel like is a major swing, right? Like they could add a receiver, but he could still be awesome, right? And then like Jaden Reed in the later rounds, I think he could be a major swing because he was so good at the beginning of the year. And I'm convinced him and Love just never got right health-wise. And if they're back and healthy, I think he could be great to start the year. Brandon Ayuk, a decent swing on upside if his ACL injury is healed and he comes in off the pup in week 4 or week 5 and he looks like himself. Like that could be a possible league winner if he's going to go in round 10. So again, this is highlighting floor. That's why we put these teams together. Pittman and Dobbs, I think, have that. If you took a lot of swings early and you're looking for guys that maybe are going to be a little bit more consistent later, those are the guys that I think are worth taking a look at.
Yeah, and the reason I really like the Tua, and as much as I don't like Tua, the Tua and Geno combination, like obviously you're starting Burrow every week, but those guys aren't going to be the guys that go on the road and beat the better opponent, but you can play the matchup so well where they're going to beat up on the little guy, right? And so I think having those two together, you can play that schedule game pretty well. So I really like that. And then I know you didn't really talk about McBride too much, but he's someone who I'm going to be targeting quite a bit. And because, last year, even with Marvin Harrison there, we saw McBride just get fed and fed and fed. And while I expect Marv to carve out a much bigger role, like Kyler loves McBride. And I'm just going to continue to ride that.
Yeah. And you notice both of our teams do have a top 3 tight end on it, right? Yeah. They have an earlier tight end, which is starting to become a trend for us a little bit.
Yeah.
Neither of us have been waiting much, so I think maybe we have to do a draft here, or we kind of wait and show you the back end of the position. But anyways, so those are the two teams. We had an upside and we had a safety build. So depending on which one you think is better, maybe you consider drafting one way or the other. We will have additional drafts coming up with Robust RB, where we draft a ton of them. We will have more drafts where we go wide receiver heavy at the beginning. Both Matt and I love to do that, have 3 or 4 wide receivers in the first 5 picks, 6 picks, and really fill out the wide receiver core and the flex spot, just kind of hammering wide receivers. So we'll show you everything. These two, I think, are very, very interesting builds and a good exercise to maybe revisit as the offseason goes on. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're still with us, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to talking to you the next one.
Later.